I'll just start by playing my cards on the table. I'm tired. Andrew Seidel, constitutional attorney, friend, hero, and legend joining me. Andrew, I'm tired. I'm tired of the headlines and the hashtag Christian nationalism. I'm tired of being tired of it, right? Yeah. We don't want to have to deal with this, but we don't have the luxury of being tired of this stuff because they've essentially declared war on the rest of us. You know, they're stacking the school boards. They're going after local, state, federal governments. They got evangelical activist judges that they're sort of planting. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of them. I mean, would you say that the Christian nationalists are being successful right now?
They are. I mean, their goal is to take over, and they are working hard towards that goal. You know, they want to redefine the American identity to align with the Christian identity, and then they're going to redefine our law accordingly. And they've made a lot of progress toward that goal. It's one thing that I've been desperately fighting against at the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I'm writing books about it, writing op-eds. I mean, we're litigating cases. This is one of the existential threats to the American Republic right now, Christian nationalism. And if we don't stand up against it, I really fear we're going to lose our country. I'm
also interested in the people who are like, well, it's not us. That's not true Christianity, etc. But many of them seem suspiciously deferential and kind of quiet. You know, they look at the Insurrection video. What was it that it was termed earlier? It was like some sort of a legitimate free protest.
Legitimate political discourse.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I was searching for the term. Like they're smashing windows. There's gunfire. There's a noose that's being hung outside the Capitol building. What the hell? Have you noticed this sort of, I don't know, it may not even be an uneasy, it might even be a happy silence from the quote unquote moderates out there?
Yeah, I mean, well, you struggle to find the term because that term makes no sense, right? Like, I mean, there was nothing legitimate or discursive about the political discourse, right? Like, it was a violent insurrection meant to overturn the results of a free and fair election. That is what we saw on January 6th. And there were many disparate identities and ideologies that were visible during that attack, but they were united under the banner of Christian nationalism.
We are the people of the Lord. We're a holy nation, a chosen generation, called to show forth His praise.
And it was that Christian nationalist viewpoint, those ideas, that created the permission structure necessary for Americans to attack their own government.
We are going to go across this nation. We are going to lock arms with other organizations and patriots just like yourself. And we are going to go to every state capital, and we are going to crush the head of the snake.
Without believing that God is on their side, that this is one nation under God, that they are restoring the country to its founding principles, that Trump is God's chosen one, you don't have an insurrection meant to overturn the results of a free and fair election. They had to believe that what they were doing was the will of God. They had to be answering to some higher power, and Christian nationalism lies at the heart of this.
So it's, hey, if you want an omelet, people, you got to break a few eggs. It's collateral. It's necessary. You know, I heard somebody use it's like the Boston Tea Party. You know, this is, it's an illegal act, but it's a necessary expression for the liberation of the good.
This was just we the people standing up to obey the Constitution and abolish a corrupt government. That's what I mean. But once we got in there, what are we going to do? We can't kill nobody. I mean, that ain't going to look right. It's all about PR, you know. I mean, it may come to that. I hope it don't, but it's a Democrat House, a crooked Democrat House, crooked Republicans too, and a crooked Democrat Senate, crooked Republicans too. And now there's a straight up crooked lying, cheating, president. And I ain't even going to say nothing about Kamala Harris. I mean, I'm a Christian. I ain't supposed to talk bad about folks, so I'm not going But you know what I'm saying? Like, you know how she got to the top, but you know, they're the ones leading this country, and they're not the Antichrist, but they're anti-Christian.
And that is the kind of permission structure that they needed to have to attack our government. Without that, I don't think you see the entitlement that was so on display that day. These people roaming the halls screaming that this is their house. And really, again, the heart of that movement, of that belief, of that permission structure that day was Christian nationalism. And that is what we are out to prove beyond all reasonable doubt.
Okay, well, before we get into the report and the proof, can you define it for us? I mean, let's just get the terms down. What is Christian nationalism?
Sure. So Christian nationalism is the belief that America was founded as a Christian nation, that our country, our laws, our government is based on Judeo-Christian principles. And most importantly, that we've strayed from that foundation, right? That we've gotten away from our godly roots. And so they use the language of return and restoration to argue for all manner of harmful public policy today. We got to get back to that Christian nation, right? They believe they are the true heirs of the American experiment, and nothing could be further from the truth. And it's really important to note that for a long time, at least in the modern era, we've treated Christian nationalism as though it is this scholarly debate about how the country was founded. Was it founded as a Christian nation? Wasn't it founded as a Christian nation? Did the founding fathers actually pray at the Constitutional Convention? No, they didn't. They rejected Franklin's proposal for prayer, right? We've treated it like this historical question, and it's never been about that. Christian nationalism has never been about the reality of American history. It is a violent, exclusionary movement bent on seizing power in the here and now. It is an existential threat to the republic.
I'm here to tell you that President Andrew Jackson on his deathbed, he made a marvelous declaration. He turned and looked at a Bible. He pointed at a copy of the Word of God just before he closed his eyes in death, and he said, and I quote, "That book, sir, is the rock on which the republic rests."
So tell me about this report. Is it a report? Do you call it a study? What exactly are we talking about here?
So Christian nationalism and the January 6th, 2021 insurrection is meant to be the report on the role that Christian nationalism played that day. It explains the role that Christian nationalism played in that attack. You know, right now you have Republicans and Trump apologists and white Christian nationalists attempting to basically memory hole and minimize the influence of white Christian nationalism in the January 6th insurrection. They're spreading disinformation, they're stonewalling investigators. And so this report seeks to refute those false narratives with clear and unavoidable facts.
Okay, well, let me jump in here quickly, Andrew. I'm sorry. But how do you begin to quantify that data? You've got some sociologists in play, legal experts. I mean, how do you sort of get that machine turning, if you would?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a comprehensive report, and we brought together some of the leading experts in the country on Christian nationalism, the top experts on Christian nationalism with leading books on the subject. And we all came together to warn the country that unless we face this threat, we are going to see a repeat of the January 6, 2021 insurrection, only it's going to be worse, and we may not survive this time. So we have contributors of the report, including prominent Christians from the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, members of Christians Against Christian Nationalism, sociologists, journalists, historians. I mean, we have experts, each speaking to their area of expertise. And this is the single most comprehensive report to date. And the two groups that published it are the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty and the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And now you can imagine that those two groups don't agree on all the issues, right? But they do agree on the separation of state and church, how important that is to true religious freedom. And they agree that Christian nationalism is a threat to the country. And so we came together to produce this report to warn the country about this serious threat.
I think that's a great example of, it's like when I had Kristen Dumais, the author of Jesus and John Wayne. I mean, she's a devout Christian. She's a Bible believer, but she's an opponent of Christian nationalism, right? So, I mean, while we disagree on this major, M-A-J-O-R, major issue, we are allies, right? We're allies to help protect what is a secular constitution. I'd sure like to see more of that. So, yeah, but I did have that first sort of blink when I heard Baptist, Christians against Christian nationalism. A lot of people think that there aren't Christians who are engaged with us in the fight, but that's refreshing to hear, man.
It is. I mean, and you know, historically, I think we forget this today, but historically, it was religious minorities, including the Baptists here in America, that have been the biggest proponents of the separation of state and church, because they understand that there's no such thing as the freedom of religion without a government that is free from religion. Now, we've seen a lot of those walls kind of falling down as more sects are running headlong towards Christian nationalism. But there are still a lot of Christians out there who oppose Christian nationalism and who support the separation of state and church. And we're not going to defeat Christian nationalism without building those bridges and standing side by side and shoulder to shoulder with our Christian brothers and sisters in this fight. It's just we're not going to win if we don't do that.
I know you cite a lot of examples in the report, and I'll let you speak to some of that. You've been watching the Ohio Senate candidate, Josh Mandel. He just says the quiet part out loud, right?
I do not believe in separation of church and state. There is no such thing. The founders of this country, the founding fathers, they did not believe in separation of church and state. When you read the United States Constitution, nowhere in the United States Constitution do you read about separation of church and state. It does not exist.
Yeah, I mean, he's a walking encyclopedia of all the terrible arguments in favor of Christian nationalism, right? He is the reason I wrote The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American. Every argument he's ever made is refuted in that book. The Christian nationalists don't have anything new, right? They've run out of these historical claims. They recycle the same thing over and over again. They rely on repetition to make their point, not truth or accuracy. So this is, again, goes to, I think, the point I'm trying to make earlier, which is that Christian nationalism is not really about American history or how our country was founded. It's about claiming that to be an American is to be a Christian, and to be a Christian is to be an American, and then rewriting our law accordingly, taking over. I mean, that really is the goal here. So, yeah, I mean, Josh Mandel is just a walking encyclopedia of terrible Christian nationalism.
I mean, if I may, you've got Mandel, you got Franklin Graham, you've got Fox fucking News, right? And they're always saying Judeo-Christian. Right. Yeah. We are founded on Judeo-Christian principles. You've addressed this whole Judeo-Christian thing. Would you address it again here, please?
Sure. I mean, I think I get into it on page 2 and 3 of the book because it's such a common claim, right? And Christian nationalism is an exclusionary movement. And the Judeo in Judeo-Christian is meant to camouflage that exclusionary movement, right? It's a fig leaf. It's a sop to an inclusion meant to say, no, look, see, we're not really as exclusionary and alienating as you think we are. Look, we're going to use this language. But when you really look into how they say this and break this down, and I do that in the book, you can tell that when they say Judeo-Christian, they really mean Christian. And they give that game away all the time. And really the first time we saw that phrase, Judeo-Christian, Judeo-Christianity, gain any steam was in the wake of World War II, when a government founded on Christian principles seemed ominously exclusive for the people who had just, watched the Nazi Holocaust. So it is really just camouflage, a fig leaf. I think that's the best way for people to think about that phrase.
You say it's going to be more dangerous, you think, next time. Yeah, I'll admit, and I'm a little bit ashamed at how monumentally naive I was years ago when I thought, book bans in this country. Are you kidding? And this going on in Florida. Book burnings. You got Pastor Greg Locke, who just in early February burned book. They had a big pyre and they threw books on it. Yeah. I know he burned your book at one. I was hoping to get one of mine in the mix. I thought, I might as well join the party. I don't think I made it, but you've made the cut. You've been burned, right?
Yeah, he singled mine out and burned it with a blowtorch. That was a little different.
But I mean, holy cow! Yeah. And there's like a jihad.
And if you want to see what patriots do when they get in an uprising, then vote to certify the fraud tomorrow. But guess what? We're paying damn close attention to who votes what tomorrow.
Churchill gave a famous speech where he said, all I can promise you is blood and pain and war and suffering. But the alternative is even worse, total slavery. So we don't care what the New World Order does. We commit to Christ, and we commit to war against the globalists with the truth, and we will never surrender.
They were very, very clear. They framed that electoral loss in terms of a war between light and evil, between goodness and darkness. I mean, they were very, very clear that this was war and that they were on God's side. So for instance, let me just give you one example from the report that we explore quite a bit. There was a group called the Jericho March. And the Jericho March was formed after the election by two federal workers who independently received, they claim, visions from God. God wanted them to, quote, let the church roar. So they formed the Jericho March, and they started hosting events and prayer rallies around the country. And they marched around state capitol buildings with shofars, blowing their shofars, these ram's horns, and chanted and sang and prayed. They hosted a huge rally on the National Mall, huge in terms of the number of speakers that were there, not huge in terms of attendance. And the rhetoric there was just very, very clearly Christian nationalist and clearly militant. And they're not hiding anything, right? Seth, you come from this background. You know what the Battle of Jericho was. It was a genocide.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it was a genocide. It was a slaughter. God's people carry the Ark of the Covenant around the city of Jericho 7 times, blowing their ram's horns, just like the modern Jericho March was doing around state capitol buildings. The walls fall down, and then they proceed to kill every living thing in the city. How are we surprised that a group that names itself after a genocide helped foment violence on January 6th? How is that a surprise to us? They could not have made it clearer. And yet, we still don't even hear that much about it. We still pretend, we still hear from the media that this is something, we can't be clear about their motivations, things like that. I mean, they were as clear as they could possibly be. They held Bibles aloft when they charged into the building. They prayed in the Senate. They carried Christian flags onto the floor of the Senate, and they openly confessed their motivations on video, aside from naming part of their movement after a genocide.
Well, you mentioned a flag. Of course, we're going to get to the Confederate flag and the ties to white supremacy. But before I get to that, I know in the report you had referenced a great many people like Reverend Kevin Jessup, who was talking about, he was invoking the militarized language of the Bible. You got people talking about, they're calling the army of the Lord the Christian battle cry. This is a powder keg, really, because you've got the language of war incorporated into this Christian nationalist attack. And then we've got ties to amazingly bigoted and horrible groups. You want to speak about these ties to white supremacy, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that I think has made it hard for people to really grasp the central role that Christian nationalism played that day, is because you saw all these disparate identities and ideologies. You saw QAnon, you saw white supremacists, you saw the Second Amendment folks, the militia groups, right? All these different groups were there, and their messages were on display that day. But really, they were all united under the banner of Christian nationalism. That was the common thread that tied them all together. A lot of people will remember the correspondent, remember the video that was shot by a correspondent from the New Yorker that showed, this kind of behind the scenes footage of the insurrection in the halls of the Capitol while they were attacking. That's where we saw the attackers up on the Senate dais giving a prayer over a bullhorn, right? The QAnon shaman.
Thank you, divine omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent Creator God, for filling this chamber with your white light of love, with your white light of harmony. Thank you for filling this chamber with patriots that love you and that love Christ.
That footage, that viral footage, I actually spoke to the correspondent who filmed that. It's a guy named Luke Mogelson, who's typically a war correspondent. And he told me that he said that the Christianity was one of the surprises to me in covering this stuff, and it has been hugely underestimated. And he finished it up by saying that Christian nationalism that you talk about is the driving force and also the unifying force of these disparate players. It's really the Christianity that ties it all together. And that quote just stuck with me, because this is the guy who was on the ground in the building during this attack filming them. And it was a surprise to him, but it was also very clearly the unifying thread. So I think it's crucial that we not minimize it, which I worry has been done.
Well, I mean, they're trying to wipe it from the public memory.
Absolutely, and so that active attempt to memory hole it, to destroy that thread, is paired with a general reluctance in the media to say anything that could reflect negatively on religion, right? And those two things could very well end up, essentially being, death by suicide for the American Republic.
Well, let me make sure I understand you. What you're saying, that they may call it an insurrection, but they are hesitant to call it a Christian nationalist effort?
Exactly. So the media's done a great job of talking about all aspects of this insurrection. They're not afraid to call it an insurrection. They're not afraid to talk about sedition and treason. They've done a reasonably good job. But when it comes to the Christian nationalist motivation, the unifying factor, they tend to just kind of get silent. And if you pair that with the active attempt to rewrite that history, rewrite the Christian nationalism out of it that you're seeing from the other side, I mean, that's a recipe for disaster and for repetition.
Well, you've also got these alternate realities that many of these people have locked themselves into, and beyond Fox News. When Fox News becomes too liberal or heathen or whatever for them, and then they go to I'm amazed at how these particular outlets have these quote unquote patriotic names. I get my news from Freedom Eagle /America /Jesus /GodandGuns.com. And I know they're telling me the truth. I mean, if you noticed, a lot of these really wackadoodle, crazy evangelical right-wing outlets are starting to see their day in the sun, right?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time on those websites and on those outlets while researching for this report.
I'm very sorry for your loss.
It was hard, man. Like, there were times where I would come home, or not come home because we're all working from home, but I'd be done for the day and I'd go out and talk to Liz, my wife, and I'd just be like, I feel just so depressed and dirty and gross. Like, I got to go take a shower, and I just need to watch The Great British Bake Off because it's just so good and wholesome, and I need that in my life.
Cleanse your palate, so to speak. Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's hard. I think when that becomes your normal, and this is part of what I came out of. We used to read a magazine. I don't think it was a news network back then, but back in the 90s, I was a reader of Newsmax, and they're still around, and it's because we don't trust the other media, because Newsmax will tell us how it really is, and when you've locked yourself in that tiny space, it's amazing how the abnormal can become normal. I'm talking here with constitutional attorney Andrew Seidel. We're talking about a new report that really quantifies and nails down the Christian nationalism of the insurrection and throughout the United States. Have you noticed how people like the QAnon shaman, etc., have become martyrs? I mean, even heroes.
Absolutely.
The hero we need kind of thing. And I look at that and I think, how does this happen?
It's crazy. Unless you believe that you are doing God's will, that you are fighting to restore this country to its roots, that you are defending God's chosen one, right? You bedazzle yourself in all manner of fur and makeup you want. If you have that permission structure, anything's possible. Right? I mean, this is the thing that justified the attack in the minds of the attackers. This is the thing that motivated the attack in the minds of the attackers. Everything else fit into that permission structure. And this is just one of the crucial things that has been missing from this discussion. And one of the things that we're really trying to, in this report, lay out and prove beyond all reasonable doubt, and also provide all the context for so people can really fully understand this.
Give me the name of the report again, and then some major findings. I mean, I'm not asking you to read the damn thing. I'll link it in the description box and promote it out on the pages to make sure people have access. But, I mean, give me the highlight reel. I mean, some of the other stuff that you found.
Sure. So the report is called Christian Nationalism and the January 6, 2021 Insurrection, right? We just went plain Jane, wanted to make it very clear what we're talking about. And again, it explains the role that Christian nationalism played in that attack. So we open with kind of an introduction like we did on this show, discussing briefly Christian nationalism, what it is. And then we have two of the leading experts in the country, Drs. Andrew Whitehead and Sam Perry, who really get down and answer the question, what is Christian nationalism, from sort of a sociological perspective. So they explore the intimate relationship between Christian nationalism and white supremacy, and QAnon sympathy, and xenophobia, and the opposition to LGBTQ rights, and common sense gun control, and vaccines, and public health measures, and all these other things that Christian nationalism pervades. And they really do get into how the more that Americans affirm the tenets of Christian nationalism, the more likely they are to, for instance, deny Trump's culpability for the riots that happened, or to affirm debunked conspiracy theories such as Black Lives Matter or Antifa being involved in January 6th. So again, you can tie this all back to Christian nationalism. Then we have Dr. Jamar Tisby, who delves deeper into the white aspect of white Christian nationalism. He explores the different conceptions of a Christian nation and what that means to Black Americans and white Americans and Christian Americans, and what love of one's country might really look like. We also have a section on the history of Christian nationalism in America, because America has endured previous waves of Christian nationalism. It's been tied to slavery and racism and segregation and the opposition of civil rights, which I think a lot of people don't realize. We have the great journalist Catherine Stewart has written a section that exposes the power network of individuals and organizations that feed on and propagate Christian nationalism, and how that network influenced public sentiment. Really remarkable work by Stewart that builds on a lot of what she's written in her book, The Power Worshippers, which hopefully everybody listening to has already read. I know you've had Catherine on your show a couple times.
Oh, yeah, she's terrific. And she takes the line, I think, that it's more about power than it might be about belief. And I know it's subjective, it's case by case, it's situational, but from her perspective, it's really about there are some forces that it may be as much or more about the retention of power and privilege than it ever was about a personal faith.
Absolutely. And using faith to justify that attempt to retain power and privilege. And this is one of the great things about the report. The way we did it is it's not co-authored. Each author, each journalist, each expert contributed their own section. So they were able to write it precisely how they want. So there might be like minor disagreements even among the sections. So you as the reader really get the full picture and all sides of the argument and the context. And then the two larger sections of the report discuss the specific evidence. It goes through the specific, enumerates all of it that proves overwhelmingly that Christian nationalism motivated and justified that attack. So the first of those sections discusses the dry runs that the Christian nationalists held between Election Day and the attack, including the Million MAGA March on November 14th, the Let the Church Roar rally on December 12th, the Women for America First rally on December 12th, the One Nation Under God prayer rally, which was held at the Supreme Court on January 5th. Explores the speakers, the messages, the signs, the flags, all of the stuff that were very, very clearly Christian nationalist in the lead up that we also saw on January 6th.
There's a lot of American citizens out here that are absolutely tired of what we're seeing. We're tired of you undermining our country. We're tired of you belittling our faith. We're tired of you trying to say that people that believe in the Bible and God and country are bigots. And we're not putting up with it anymore.
Lord, as you called those, the children of Israel, to blow the trumpet and march around the walls of Jericho, and you brought them down for victory, so too, God, we ask you to bring down the walls, Father, the walls of evil that come against you and your kingdom.
We are the final mission to ending this high treason. Hallelujah. We are without question men born for war. We are fully equipped as warriors with battle armor suited for our assignment. What is our assignment? It is to restore the Eden mandate of occupation and expansion of the glory of God filling the earth.
Again, we have the attackers confessing on tape repeatedly in selfie videos saying why they were doing this. And it's very clear that in the attacker's mind, that Christian nationalist permission structure granted them a license to attack our government and to overthrow a free and fair election. The attackers told us loudly and repeatedly that their Christian nationalist ideas justified the attack.
That's, God will judge us, for what we did. And I'm redeemed by the blood of Jesus Christ, right? There's no judgment that stands against me. Perhaps I did something wrong, I tried to be as respectful as I could while I was in there, while still saying what I felt needed to be said. But what else what were we supposed to do? Yeah. What are Americans supposed to do?
So that's really the goal of this report, to get people to actually believe what they are saying. Not because what they're saying is true, but because that is a threat to our country. That is why they attacked our government. And then we also end Amanda Tyler, who is the director of the Baptist Joint Committee, really explores some of what you were talking about earlier, some of the Christian responses to Christian nationalism. She is the organizer of the group Christians Against Christian Nationalism, and looks at it from a way that we can all stand together opposed to Christian nationalism as kind of a conclusion of the report. And she does a good job of reminding her fellow Christians that they have to take some personal responsibility to oppose Christian nationalism.
Trump has this sort of slippery language where he uses loaded language, but also has what he would, I think, consider to be plausible deniability. It's not my fault. It's not my party. Of course, we hear the reports of how he's like in the White House going, these people are fighting for me. He's rewinding the footage and just watching it over and over again. You hold Trump responsible for much of it?
I think without a doubt. And what you're talking about there is stochastic terrorism, right? It's you say just enough. You blow enough dog whistles so that your folks know what they are meant to do.
Now is not the time to retreat. Now is the time to fight harder than ever before.
The problem is we need a party that's going to fight.
If you don't fight to save your country with everything you have, you're not going to have a country left. You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong. We have come to demand that Congress do the right thing, and we fight. We fight like hell.
If you look, Seth, at the section that where we talk about and explore the evidence in the lead up to January 6th, you see so much of that because Christian nationalism provides this ready-made code, this whole array of dog whistles that can be blown in order that all lead in the minds of the people listening to this one inevitable conclusion. My country is being stolen from me and I have to fight to get it back right now. And that means fight violently.
They've got the gallows set outside this Capitol building. It's time to start fucking using them.
Start making a list, put all those names down, and we start hunting them down one by one.
To me, it's just, especially having, authored those two sections and spent the last year just immersed in that cesspool to me, nothing could be clearer than they have this very intricate network of dog whistles to stoke that stochastic terrorism.
I struggle with it because I know that he loves attention. Like Trump just loves to be in the spotlight. So now that he's no longer president, I struggle with how much of what he's doing do I share. We know he's out of control and reckless and doesn't give a shit and is going to, excuse and deny, et cetera. But at the same time, if you don't talk about him, are you, ignoring the problem? Don't we need to shine a big white spotlight on this and, let everybody know about it? Do you struggle with that? Like, how much attention do you give the guy?
Yeah. I mean, that certainly is a struggle, and something we talked about when writing the report. And again, we didn't focus a whole lot on Trump in the report itself. But again, the clear end goal of January 6th was to overturn the results of a free and fair election. I mean, 7 million more people voted for Joe Biden than voted for Donald Trump. And they still were trying to put Donald Trump into power. And they were trying to do that through violence. And I mean, that was very clearly one of the things that they were trying to do that day. I think there's a very good argument to be made that it's not necessarily Trump himself that they want, though there is a cult of personality happening there. But the rewards that he so willingly gave to the Christian nationalist movement in America, the Supreme Court, for instance. I mean, anything they wanted, he gave them. Rubber stamped absolutely everything. So it is, again, Christian nationalism is inextricable from modern American politics, unfortunately.
Let's talk about the Supreme Court. You mentioned the racial dividing lines in this country. I mean, what does all this mean? What are the implications? Is it, what happens when we lose a justice at this measure? Which justice holding which particular viewpoints or cultural influences, right? Because we've seen talk about the Christian faith represented overwhelmingly in the court. Like, this is not a representative Supreme Court. I'm always saying this out loud. But, I mean, what's your take on this whole opening in the Supreme Court?
I mean, the Supreme Court has been captured by Christian nationalists right now. I mean, you have Justice Gorsuch the other day talking about the so-called separation of state and church, church and state, as they say it. So I think it is, this court is...
Is it an activist court? I mean, would you just call it?
It's absolutely an activist court. I think it's an illegitimate court. I think it is one of the central problems that we are going to face as a nation is this Supreme Court as it stands right now with a 6-3 hyper conservative partisan majority.
I mean, what does the opening mean? I mean, what is this new appointment? Not implied.
You're talking, I'm sorry.
I mean, what?
You're talking about Justice Breyer retiring?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I mean, I know I'm totally interested in, I mean, after Barrett gets in there, right, and Kavanaugh, et cetera, and we've seen even, I would call it infighting within the courts itself. Sotomayor comes forward. She essentially comes forward and she's just like, oh my God. I mean, that's the subtext of what I hear when she's making these sort of public statements. Like, holy shit. Some of my fellow justices have lost the plot. Do you hear that sometimes when she makes a statement?
Yes. I mean, Justice Sotomayor is just a pillar on the court. I mean, I would love to see 9 of her on the Supreme Court. She's amazing, and she's a staunch defender of the separation of state and church.
I mean, it's weird to see the court polarized so publicly, though. I mean, I haven't seen that in my lifetime, though.
I mean, we certainly haven't seen it public facing. And one of the myths that is very popular in this country is that the Supreme Court is an apolitical, unbiased jurisprudential body. And I think there has been an active attempt by the members of the court to put forth that story, that myth. But I think to a certain extent, it's always been a myth. I think that curtain is falling down more now than ever in the past, in part because it is a more partisan, conservative court than we've seen in a very, very long time. Probably at least since probably the 1930s. So it is, I think the court is being revealed. I think there have been many times in its past where we've seen kind of waves like this, but it's a broken body at this point.
I mean, with the new appointment coming up, should we be happy, excited, hopeful?
With Breyer retiring and President Joe Biden getting to nominate a replacement, I am hopeful. I mean, the biggest thing is that Amy Coney Barrett replaced Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a staunch defender of separation of state and church, of women's rights, reproductive rights. That is about as big a ideological swing as you can see on the court. We saw something similar when Justice Thomas replaced Thurgood Marshall. The conservatives are very good at taking and co-opting and flipping liberal seats. That has been a concern with Justice Breyer simply because of his age on the court. A lot of court watchers have been worried that if he did not retire now, who knows what would happen in the election. Then he might die or be forced into retirement, and that liberal, quote unquote, seat would flip to become a hyper-conservative seat. So that danger seems to have passed right now. Not entirely, because the Senate is split 50-50, and there are scenarios, not involving politics, but involving the health of certain senators who are Democratic senators from states with Republican governors where they can, anyway.
Walking that language very carefully. I'll just say it outright. What happens if they kick off and the majority switches in the Senate? Would that be, I mean, am I being
that could be
crass?
A disaster.
Okay.
That's not something I expected. So the thing that I worry about, and I worry about this because it would hold the seat on the court open, it would be tumultuous for the country. I don't worry about this for political reasons. The thing that I worry about is a Democratic senator dying in a state with a Republican governor, where the Republican governor can appoint a senator to replace him, appoint anybody from either party. And I think there are either around, give or take 10, I'm not going to quote an exact number, of senators in that situation. And we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? I mean, like, this isn't out of the realm of possibility. The senators are by and large significantly older than other government officials. So you can, that's the kind of scenario that I worry about. I'm not really worried about party switching or, the minority party being able to grind things to a halt in the Senate. Specifically, I'm really just worried about the health and well-being and safety of a few seconds.
Well, I mean, as we wrap up our conversation here, I know regarding the report, I see a lot of this like the Christian Nationalists are like a wounded animal in some ways, as they see the increasing secularization of the non-religious in this country are just skyrocketing. Mm-hmm. So as they are losing demographically, now they've got to strategically secure the halls of power. Otherwise, we're talking about cultural irrelevance. They're desperate, right?
Oh, you're 100% correct. I mean, that's why they sought to capture the courts and the Supreme Court, right? You can solidify minority rule for a generation because these judges have lifetime appointments. That is exactly why they went on the crusade to capture the courts. So, I mean, you're absolutely right to identify that as one of the core goals of Christian nationalists. I mean, they are raging against the dying of their privilege. Christian nationalists are raging against the dying of their privilege.
So, I mean, in the heat of the moment now, we've got real problems. Mm-hmm. Let's prognosticate. I mean, let's say the demographic, sort of the cultural incline of secularization of non-religious people ambivalent about religion, atheist or otherwise. Mm-hmm. At some point, the tide's got to turn, right? I mean, the political structure has to begin to more and more reflect us, right?
I mean, that's what they're trying to prevent, right? I mean, that's why you have this Supreme Court saying that partisan gerrymandering is acceptable, why that Supreme Court is striking down the Voting Rights Act. It's not a coincidence that they're doing a lot of these structural reforms through the Supreme Court that aid that waning demographic.
Sure, they make it harder to vote. They make it harder for non-evangelical conservative Christians to maneuver their way in legally, so they just simply change policy and law, right?
Exactly. And, you know, I mean, Seth, this is the thing that I kind of keep coming back to. And I thought about this so much when I was writing the report, that America is a shared idea. And Christian nationalism refuses to share. It excludes non-Christians and the wrong kind of Christians. So America will never be a Christian nation, because the moment it becomes a Christian nation, it will cease to be America. Those two things cannot peacefully coexist. One will triumph. And so this is the choice that we face as a nation: Christian nationalism or America, because we can't have both. And that's what you are talking about when you're talking, and that's what we're talking about right now with, they are restructuring the country to favor their waning demographic. And that's what I mean by saying that the two can't peacefully coexist, that we're going to have one or the other. And I mean, we are nearing this inflection point where one is going to win out.
We have to be informed about this. I think we have to stay active and motivated. As exasperated and tired as we all are, I think sometimes they hope we are tired, that we'll just wash our hands of it, give up, say, screw it, which is, I don't want to do that. And I think no matter how weary we are, we've got to just keep kicking. And I'm glad that you're on our side, Andrew. I'll let you go back to watch more of One American News or Patriot.eagle. Whatever it is you're doing. And I will link to this.
Now that the report's out, I'm like, I'm going to bail on that world for a little while.
I will link to this. It's a critical report. I mean, you owe it to yourself. I think you owe it to your country to know what these people are up to. And it's been quantified. It's been laid out in a very sort of easy or relatively easy to digest form. So it's linked in the description box. Andrew Seidel, thanks so much for having this conversation. I'm sure we'll talk again.
Always a pleasure, Seth. Thank you so much.